And that's the thing that we have to be wary of. So in either case, we're going to have a debt problem. And the question is, how quickly and does it evolve in the way that I described? Debt service payments are lower.
The U.S. will enter a downturn in the fourth quarter, followed by a year of contraction and a European recession in 2024, according to HSBC Asset Management. In its mid-year outlook, the British banking giant's asset manager said recession warnings are flashing red for many economies, while fiscal and monetary policies are out of sync with stock and bond markets. Joseph Little, global chief strategist at HSBC Asset Management, said while some parts of the economy have remained resilient thus far, the balance of risks points to high recession risk now, with Europe lagging the U.S., but the macro trajectory generally aligned. Hello and welcome to Money Talks. In today's video, Ray Dalio talks about his prediction of the U.S. falling into a recession, his reason for that, and more. So without further ado, let's get started with the video.
These three forces are the biggest in our lifetime. Never magnitudes existed in our lifetime like they do now. You just touched on one. The largest amount of debt offerings and monetization of debt. What is money worth? What is the supply demand? We'll talk about that in a second. The second is the internal political conflict, populism of the left and the right at war with each other, and neither side is going to accept losing. That kind of situation that has implications. They're economic, taxes, all of that, but they go beyond that. And then number three is the great power conflict. In other words, a rise of a great power like China that's comparable to the United States in that conflict. Those three things coming together, each one of them is in greater degrees than has existed in our lifetime before. But if you go back in history, major times, and all three of them coming together have come together repeatedly, like in the 1930 to 45 period and other periods like that. So those three factors made me study the last 500 years of history to watch the dynamic of the rise and decline of reserve currencies, debt, and also of empires.
We're already in a mild profit recession, and corporate defaults have started to creep up too. Little said in the report seen by CNBC. The silver lining is that we expect high inflation to moderate relatively quickly. That will create an opportunity for policymakers to cut rates. Despite the hawkish tone adopted by central bankers and the apparent stickiness of inflation, particularly at the core level, HSBC Asset Management expects the U.S. Federal Reserve to cut interest rates before the end of 2023, with the European Central Bank and the Bank of England following suit next year. The Fed paused its monetary tightening cycle at its June meeting, leaving its Fed funds rate target range at between 5% and 5.25%, but signaled that two further hikes can be expected this year. Market pricing narrowly anticipates the Fed funds rates to be a quarter percentage point higher in December of this year, according to CME Group's Fed Watch tool. HSBC's Little acknowledged that central bankers will not be able to cut rates if inflation remains significantly above target, as it is in many major economies, and said it is therefore important that the recession doesn't come too early and cause disinflation. The coming recession scenario will be more like the early 1990s recession, with our central scenario being a 1 to 2% drawdown in GDP. HSBC expects the recession in Western economies to result in a difficult, choppy outlook for markets for two reasons. First, we have the rapid tightening of financial conditions that's caused a downturn in the credit cycle. Second, markets do not appear to be pricing a particularly pessimistic view of the world. We think the incoming news flow over the next 6 months could be tough to digest for a market that's pricing a soft landing. Little suggested that this recession will not be sufficient to purge all inflation pressures from the system, and therefore developed economies face a regime of somewhat higher inflation and interest rates over time. As a result, we take a cautious overall view on risk and cyclicality in portfolios. Interest rate exposure is appealing, particularly the Treasury curve, the front end and mid part of the curve, Little said, adding that the firm sees some value in European bonds too. In credit, we are selective and focus on higher quality credits in investment grade over speculative investment grade credits. We are cautious on developed market stocks.
The economics of a country are no different than the economics of an individual or a company, in that you can't spend more than you earn. Can't spend more than you earn without getting into debt. And if you have debt, you have to pay back the debt. The only difference is you can print the money. That's it. Which we do. And so the question is, what ends that, or is there no end to that?
Is there a day of reckoning?
Okay. There are two things that end this. First, that the debt service payments to those who are holding the debt, who need it for reward, they want to get paid back plus an interest rate. So you have to have those debt service payments. Those debt service payments increasingly encroach on your spending. In other words, either this thing compounds, and that means that somebody's wanting to buy all that debt, but you have to pay back in one way or another, and when that happens, it encroaches on other spending. So that's debt service is one. The other big one is the supply-demand balance issue. In other words, when it happens that people don't want to buy enough debt that needs to be sold, you have the bigger crisis. It's a debt rollover question. And so let's say, as we're now going to issue another huge amount of debt, and the owners of that debt, there's a lot of owners of that debt who own too much of it. In fact, the main problem that's existing today, that is with banks and with other governments and others, is they own too many treasuries that are losing money. Okay, so the Silicon Valley Bank losses and so on, and the banking system's losses are largely due, including the central bank's losses, the Federal Reserve's losses, are largely due to holding bonds that are gone down in value, therefore lost money, and funding it with an interest rate that's too high. So that dynamic is very, very risky. Over the next couple of years, we're going to see that supply-demand dynamic. And even if that's not a problem, you have the debt encroaching on the debt service. So it's unsustainable. And the question is, when? It's made more unsustainable by certain things in geopolitics, internationally. For example,
China doesn't want to hold as much of our debt, maybe.
That's one. Other countries, too, are increasingly feeling worried about sanctions. In other words, could they be sanctioned? These types of things can affect the demand for the bonds. If you get them to sell the bonds, then it's a real problem. So, because that means either interest rates go up a lot or central banks have to come in and print a lot. And that's the thing that we have to be wary of. So in either case, we're going to have a debt problem. And the question is, how quickly, and does it evolve in the way that I described? Debt service payments are wrong.
Sure. So what's your price prediction for Bitcoin at the end of 2023? Tell us in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon with the next video. Thank you so much for watching.